lad from Atheist Ireland. Sanal is a well-known book author, and he wants to give us a little bit of a speech today.
Okay, thank you very much, Joe. What we're doing here essentially, Atheist Ireland is an advocacy group, both for atheism and reason over superstition and supernaturalism, and also for an ethical secular state where the state doesn't give any preference to any individual or organisation on the basis of their religious beliefs. And indeed, similarly on the basis of their non-religious beliefs. We would be as opposed to an atheist state as we would to a religious state. The distinction is that between what religious people mistake us for looking for and what we're actually looking for is that religious states promote religion and atheist states promote atheism, and we're looking for a secular state that promotes neither, but that is neutral on the issue of supernatural issues and religious ethics. We have a detailed policy document that you can get details of on our website of politically what we're looking for in a document that we call 5 Steps to Civil Rights in a Secular Ireland. And those 5 steps are essentially a secular Irish constitution, secular Irish parliament, secular Irish government, secular Irish education system, and secular Irish healthcare system. And I'll give you just a brief rundown of why those 5 things are important. Then Jane will say something in more detail about the need for a secular education system, which is what we think is really the key to all of the others, because it is through the education system that the religious prejudice in society manages to maintain itself from generation to generation. And so it's particularly important that we resolve that issue. And then after that, Sanal Edamaruku will talk about his experience in India, where he's currently facing blasphemy charges for exposing a supposedly crying statue of Jesus as being caused by faulty plumbing and capillary action. So that's the kind of both. It's a really strange situation, blasphemy laws. They're both incredibly silly and incredibly dangerous at the same time, because you have criminal charges that are like something out of a Monty Python sketch, but actually being used to jail people, to have people's houses attacked by mobs in a lot of Islamic states. And there are some people around the world who are currently facing execution for making comments that are different to the mainstream Islamic view in most states, but not necessarily Islamic states, although they're the worst. India is theoretically a secular state, and yet Sanal is in the situation that he's in. You also have Russia, the situation with the members of the Pussy Riot band, who are, some of whom are currently in jail for singing protest song in a cathedral. So that's essentially what we're doing today. So the first thing that I'm going to outline is the 5 steps to a secular Ireland that are the core of Atheist Ireland's political advocacy project. In terms of the secular constitution, our constitution, which was written in 1937, and reflects the Catholic ethos of 1937, which seems to believe that the creator of the universe needed aim and Donnelly and the Catholic Church in order to vindicate its rights. It starts off with a clause saying that all power comes from the Holy Trinity. It contains a clause saying that the state acknowledges that the homage of public worship is due to Almighty God, which is a clause enshrining the right of the God into the Constitution, as opposed to the right of the people to worship that God. There are clauses that require the President of Ireland and judges in Ireland and members of the Council of State in Ireland to swear a religious oath before taking office, asking God to direct and sustain them. That means that, in real terms, a conscientious atheist cannot become President of Ireland, cannot serve as a judge in Ireland, or cannot serve as a member of the Council of State in Ireland. There are a range of clauses in the Constitution that reflect Catholic teaching. The most recent in terms of the supposedly pro-life referendum enshrines Catholic teaching about the rights of the unborn, which is phrased bizarrely as an adjective with no noun attached to it, because they couldn't even figure out what it was that they were supposed to be trying to say in that. And more recently, because of a clause in the original constitution which says that blasphemy is an offence which shall be punishable in accordance with law, Dermot Ahern, the previous Minister for Justice, felt that he had to put forward a new law against blasphemy, the only country in the civilised world to pass a new law against blasphemy in the 21st century, a couple of years ago. And that law is being cited at the United Nations by the Islamic states, led by Pakistan, as what they want implemented. Literally part of the wording of the Irish law has been incorporated into the Islamic states' motions at the United Nations trying to make blasphemy and defamation of religion a crime internationally. So it's not just here that has an effect, it has effect internationally as well. In terms of secular parliament, both in terms of the procedures of our parliament, our parliamentarians shouldn't be starting every day by saying a prayer, asking the Christian God to direct every word and action that they take. When parliamentarians pray at the start of their workday, it's not our parliamentarians praying as individuals. That is effectively the state at prayer. It's completely unacceptable in a pluralist society that the state should start its business with a prayer to a specific Christian God. And there has been in the Senate recently an attempt to try and ameliorate that by saying, well, we'll have 30 seconds of silent reflection for others before we say the prayer, which has been presented as a compromise, but it in reality isn't. In reality, it makes it even worse. It's saying, okay, actually we do recognise that the rest of you exist, but you're still not going to get the same position as we get. You can have your little 30 seconds to quietly reflect on what you want to, and then we'll say out loud that the Christian God is the God that will be directing our work. And unsurprisingly, the laws that emanate from that type of constitution and that type of parliamentary procedure have been laws that privilege the Catholic Church in particular and other religions generally over other religions and no religions. We have, everybody's aware of the fact that religions get tax breaks. What a lot of people aren't aware in Ireland is that as well as that, religions in Ireland are specifically exempted from our equality laws. The Equal Status Act and the Employment Equality Act all have explicit clauses allowing religions to act in a way that would be discrimination under the law if any other group engaged in it, but if religions do it in order to protect the religious ethos of institutions that they're running, it doesn't count as discrimination. There are, in terms of secular government, we need to have all aspects of government, whether it's decision making or administration, or whether it's funding either organs of the state or independent bodies that are receiving funding from the government for whatever reason. That should be dependent on those organisations not promoting either any particular religious view or indeed an atheistic view. The state should be neutral on these supernatural theological issues. They have enough to be dealing with in terms of dealing with the real world without trying to worry about imaginary afterlives as well. And so we are campaigning to have the state to remain strictly neutral on all dealings with religious or non-religious groups, and just to deal with people as citizens, irrespective of their religious or non-religious beliefs. We also want the state to stop treating the Holy See or the Vatican or whatever name it chooses to go under when it's pretending to be a state as a state. It's the only religion in the world that has that privilege of acting as a religion when it suits them and acting as a state when it suits them. They don't have any of the normal attributes of a state. They don't have a proper territory. It's essentially the size of a theme park in the middle of Rome. They don't supply their own police service. Essentially, they don't supply their own just general facilities. That most of what they do in terms of city services are effectively run from Rome. Even our embassy there, there was some fuss about recently, it's not even in the Vatican. It's outside the Vatican. It's in Rome, in Italy. So the final issue in terms of government, which relates to the administration of justice, is when people go to court in Ireland, we're faced with the option of either swearing a religious oath on the Bible, or if we're aware of the option, excuse me, I can ask for it, we can choose to take a secular declaration instead. But if you choose to take a non-religious declaration, you are in effect letting people in the court know what your religious or non-religious beliefs are, in a place where it's A, not relevant to why you're there, and B, can prejudice people against you. There has indeed been a court case at the European Court of Human Rights a few years ago by some Greek citizens on this very issue, and the European Court of Human Rights found in their favour that even by being given that option, the state is effectively forcing you to reveal information about your religious or non-religious beliefs, which is contrary to your human rights in terms of private life and conscience. So those are three sort of general sets of issues in terms of the Irish Constitution, in terms of the Irish Parliament and Irish government. Now, there are two specific areas that we think are important enough to include among those the five main issues that we're campaigning for. One is secular education system, and I won't say anything about that because Jane Donnelly, who's our education policy officer, will be talking about that in a few moments. And the fifth of our 5 points is a secular healthcare system, and that, tragically, is in recent weeks has come to light as an important issue with the death of Savita in Galway, and it frankly shows how corrupted and debased our ethics and our public discourse about ethics have become by religion. That we are in a situation where in the 21st century we are having to engage in a debate with our government to say that we wanted them to legislate to make it lawful for doctors in a hospital to save the life of a woman who is dying. It is absolutely extraordinary that is the level, that the lowest possible ethical hurdle that you could imagine, that is the level at which we're conducting our debate on this issue. And even when the debate moves on to, why do we have these situations, the concern seems to be more about, well, what about the impact on politicians, what about the impact on the doctors and their fears for their careers, and way down the list is the impact on the women concerned. The bottom line is, in a pluralist republic based on human rights, medical decisions should be based on compassion, human rights, and the medical needs of the patient, and should not be made on the basis of religious ethics. And no person in a hospital should be forced to undergo anything related to religious beliefs or values or the imposition of a religious environment or religious practices that they don't themselves share. If people want to undergo hospital treatment on the basis of their own personal religious beliefs, that's fine, but they shouldn't be forced on other people who do not share those beliefs. So with the exception of the secular education issue, which Jane is going to address now, those are the 5 things that Atheist Ireland is campaigning for: a secular Irish constitution, parliament, government, education system, and healthcare system. I'll ask Jane to say a few words now about the need for a secular education system, and then we'll move on to Sanal Edamaruku, who will talk about its situation in India.
I'm the Education Policy Officer for Atheist Ireland. I'll just give you a framework of how the education system in Ireland works. A couple of years ago, one of our journalists in the Irish Times said, agents of a foreign state control our schools. And I'm going to set out the framework for why he said that. There's a case at the European Court of Human Rights now. It's a Cork woman. Her name is Louise O'Keefe, and she's taken the state to the European Court. She's been to the Supreme Court already. And in that case, Justice Hardiman looked at the education system, and he said the state cedes control of the education system to the interest of patron bodies. And if you look up the word cede in the dictionary, it'll say surrender by treaty. So we surrender control of our education system to the interests of patron bodies. Now, the main patron body in Ireland is the Catholic Church. At primary level, they control over 92% of the schools. So the state, the Republic of Ireland, surrenders control of its education system in the main to the agents of a foreign state, because the Holy See, it classes itself and is classed as a foreign state. In Ireland then, under our Equality, the Equal Status Act and the Employment Equality legislation, we give these mainly foreign state exemptions in order to uphold their ethos. The Irish state provides for education as opposed to provides education. It funds private bodies. It also provides for the education of minorities in those schools. So that means that if you're a secular parent or even a religious minority in a particular area, you have no option and are coerced into sending your children to the local Catholic school. They can give preference to co-religionists and they can discriminate on the basis of religion. That's basically what it is. The European Court of Human Rights are looking at this case next March. Now, the Irish Human Rights Commission have pointed out in a third-party submission to the European Court that it doesn't believe that the human rights of citizens in Ireland are protected in these schools. So that means such rights as freedom of conscience, the right to equality before the law, and the right to be free from discrimination. A couple of years ago, the United Nations Human Rights Committee took Ireland to task over the religious integrated curriculum in these schools. They said it breaches the rights of secular parents and their children. And they picked out secular parents and their children. They said it was discrimination, breaches their right to equality before the law, and their right to freedom of conscience, and it also breaches the rights of the child. So you have 5 bodies now under 5 conventions taking Ireland to task over the Irish education system. And there's also an issue under the CERD, which they're talking about segregation in schools, because I don't know whether a lot of you will remember in 2008 we ended up in North County Dublin with a school for completely for minorities, and they were all from a certain African country, and that was an absolute and utter disgrace, and that was because of the exemptions under the Equal Status Act. So what are we doing here in Atheist Ireland? What we're doing to try and fight this discrimination and inequality is we make submissions to the UN. We have met the Council of Europe, and we're pushing to find Ireland, for the UN to find Ireland in breach of its international obligations. And in another year or so, Ireland is up under the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. And we will be there. We have made a submission, and we'll continue to fight for the right to equality before the law, to be free from discrimination, and our right to freedom of conscience, because that is what you would expect in a modern democratic republic, and that is what we have not got at this stage. Thank you.
Sanal Edamaruku is one of the most inspirational people that I know. In terms, he's spent many years in India debunking superstition and miracles, which have led him at this stage to having had to flee his country, and is living abroad and is currently on a tour of countries trying to both raise moral support and political support for trying to both save himself so that he can go back to India without fear of being arrested and convicted of blasphemy, and also to change ultimately the blasphemy laws and have them repealed both in India and internationally. So Sanal will start with a brief presentation, then we'll open the discussion to the floor, and whatever questions or comments that you have for any of the 3 of us, or indeed for Joe, who is coordinating our Cork activities here. We'll move on to that then. Sanal.